He opens the dusty barn and freezes. A withered woman hangs from a beam. By day, neighbors whisper. By night, the shadows stalk him. Can the lonely mountaineer prove his innocence, or will his dream of home turn into a trap? A story of how suspicion devours a man. Caleb Warwick's boots crunched on the dry valley dirt as he stepped off the wagon, his eyes squinting against the sun blazing over the jagged peaks. He'd spent 10 years trapping in the high mountains, living off elk and grit. But now he was here, in this forgotten corner of the West, with every coin he'd saved sunk into a sagging ranch. The place was a wreck, fences leaning like drunks, a barn creaking in the wind, and a house that smelled of dust and neglect. He wanted a life of simple work, just him and the land, far from the ghosts of his past. But as he dropped his pack by the porch, a knot tightened in his gut, like the mountains were watching, waiting. He got to work that first day hammering nails into splintered fence posts until his hands ached. The valley was quiet, save for the lowing of the few scrawny cattle he'd bought, and the distant howl of a coyote. Sweat soaked his shirt, and the sun burned his neck as he dragged logs to patch a gap in the corral. This was what he'd wanted, labor that filled the hours, a chance to build something solid. He'd left the trails behind, the endless cold nights, and the weight of always moving on. Yet, as he paused to wipe his brow, the silence felt too heavy, pressing against his chest. He couldn't shake the sense that something was off, like a rifle left loaded in a dark corner. By evening, Caleb sat on the porch, chewing on a piece of jerky, watching the mountains turn purple against the fading sky. He'd dreamed of this, his own land, no one to answer to. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was thick, like the air before a storm. He thought of the men he'd known in the mountains, hard types who trusted no one, and wondered if he'd ever outrun that life. His fingers traced the worn handle of his knife, a habit from years of staying sharp, staying alive. The stars came out cold and distant, and he felt it again, that nagging pull like the past wasn't done with him. He stood stretching his stiff back and glanced at the barn across the yard. Its door hung crooked, shadows pooling inside. Tomorrow he'd start there, clear out whatever junk the last owner left. For now he headed inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. As he lay on the creaky cot, the wind whispered through the cracks, and Caleb's heart stayed restless. The mountains hadn't let him go, not yet. The barn door groaned like a dying animal as Caleb Warwick shoved it open, the rusted hinges fighting him every inch. Dust swirled in the slanted morning light, thick enough to choke on, and the air inside smelled of old hay and something sour, like forgotten fruit gone bad. He'd put off tackling the barn for 3 days, focusing on fences and cattle, but the place nagged at him, its sagging roof a reminder of how much work this ranch demanded. He stepped inside, his boots scuffing the dirt floor, and squinted into the gloom, expecting broken tools or rotting crates. What he saw stopped his breath cold. High above, tied to a beam, hung a woman's body, shriveled like a husk left in the sun too long. Her dress, faded to gray, clung to her bones, and her head tilted at an angle that made Caleb's stomach lurch. The rope creaked faintly, swaying in a draft he couldn't feel. His heart slammed against his ribs, and he stumbled back, his shoulder hitting a post hard enough to send a jolt through his arm. The smell wasn't just decay. It was the heavy, stale weight of time, like the barn had sealed this secret away for years. Caleb's hand went to his knife, instinct from the mountains, but there was no threat here, just a nightmare he couldn't unsee. He forced himself to look again, his eyes tracing the brittle shape. Who was she? How long had she been here, hidden in this crumbling tomb of a barn? His mind raced, piecing together fragments. Maybe a drifter, maybe someone tied to the ranch's last owner. But the questions only tightened the knot in his chest. He'd come here to build a life, to find peace, and now this thing that screamed trouble louder than a gunshot. He backed out, the sunlight outside blinding after the barn shadows. His breath came fast, ragged, as he leaned against the doorframe, gripping it to steady himself. The valley stretched quiet around him, the mountains looming like silent judges. But all he could see was that body, swaying in the dark. His dream of a simple life felt like a cruel joke now, shattered in a single moment. He slammed the barn door shut, the thud echoing across the yard, but it didn't shut out the image burned into his head. Caleb stood there, sweat beading on his brow, knowing one thing for sure. Whatever peace he'd hoped for was gone, buried under the weight of what he'd just found. Caleb Warwick sat by the fire, the orange glow flickering across his weathered face as the night closed in around his ranch. The image of the body in the barn clung to him like damp cold, refusing to fade. He poked at the embers with a stick, sparks snapping into the dark, and wrestled with the choice tearing him apart. Tell the sheriff about the woman's corpse, or keep it hidden. Reporting it seemed right, but the thought of a lawman sniffing around, pinning the blame on him, a loner with no ties, made his jaw clench. He'd seen how quick folks were to judge a man who didn't fit their mold. He tossed another log on the fire, the crackle loud against the valley's stillness. If he went to town, told the truth, what then? He'd bought this place fair, but he was a stranger here, a mountain man with a past full of shadows. The sheriff would dig, ask questions Caleb couldn't answer. What if they thought he'd done it? Hung her up there himself. His hand shook as he gripped the stick, snapping it in two. He'd come here to escape suspicion, not invite it, but that body was a trap waiting to spring. "You're a damn fool, Caleb," he muttered, his voice rough in the quiet. "Thought you could outrun trouble." He leaned back against the porch step, staring at the stars, cold and sharp above the mountains. He'd faced bears, blizzards, and starvation in the high country, but this was different. This wasn't a fight he could win with a knife or grit. It was people with their whispers and doubts that scared him now. He tried to reason it out, talking to the fire like it could answer. Bury her quiet, and no one knows. But if they find out later, it's worse. They'll say you hid it 'cause you're guilty. The loneliness hit him then, heavier than the dark. He'd chosen this life, this solitary patch of dirt, thinking it would free him. But now, with that body in the barn, the silence felt like a noose tightening around him. He stood, pacing the yard, his boots scuffing the dry earth. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks cutting into the sky, and he felt their weight, like they were pressing him down. He'd wanted a home, a place to belong, but all he had now was fear, and a secret that could ruin him. Caleb stopped, his breath sharp, and looked toward the barn's black silhouette. Whatever he decided, there was no going back. Caleb Warwick felt the air shift in the valley, like the moment before a storm breaks. He hadn't told a soul about the body in the barn, but by the fourth day, word had slithered into town, twisting through the dusty streets like a snake. He'd gone to the general store for nails and coffee, and the clerk, a wiry man with a pinched face, barely met his eyes, his hands fumbling the change. Out on the boardwalk, two women in bonnets stopped talking as he passed, their gazes sharp as barbed wire. Caleb kept his head down, his boots thudding on the wood, but the weight of their stares burned into his back. In the tavern that evening, the air was thick with smoke and the sour tang of whiskey. Caleb just wanted a quiet drink, something to dull the knot in his chest, but the room went still when he pushed through the swinging doors. Men at the bar turned, their eyes narrowing, sizing him up like he was a stray dog that might bite. He settled at a corner table, nursing a glass, when two ranchers, broad-shouldered and red-faced, sauntered over. The taller one, with a scar across his knuckles, leaned in close, his breath hot with liquor. "Heard you found something ugly in that barn of yours, Warwick. Care to tell us what kind of man moves into a place like that?" Caleb's grip tightened on his glass, but he kept his voice steady. "Ain't your business what I found. I'm just trying to live my life." The second man, shorter, with a patchy beard, smirked and leaned closer. "Folks say you're hiding something. A man don't buy a cursed ranch unless he's got secrets of his own." Caleb stood, his chair scraping loud enough to turn heads. "You got something to say it plain, or back off." They didn't move, but the room's silence pressed harder than their words. He left the tavern, the night air cool against his flushed skin, but the suspicion followed him like a shadow. Back at the ranch, he sat on the porch, the mountains dark and silent, and felt the eyes of the valley on him. Neighbors he hadn't even met yet were talking, weaving stories about a man they didn't know. Every creak of the house, every rustle in the brush felt like judgment closing in. Caleb rubbed his hands together, calluses rough against his palms, and realized the stairs weren't just in town. They were part of him now, a weight he couldn't shake. He'd come here for freedom, but the whispers were chaining him tighter than any rope. Caleb Warwick was mending a fence post when the sheriff's horse trotted up, kicking dust into the morning air. Sheriff Amos Tate, a lean man with a gray mustache and eyes like flint, dismounted with a creak of leather. Caleb straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, his stomach twisting as the sheriff's boots crunched closer. He'd known this was coming. Rumors like the ones swirling in town didn't stay quiet long, but knowing didn't make the moment any easier. Tate tipped his hat, but there was no warmth in it. "Warwick, we need to talk about that barn of yours," he said, pulling a small notebook from his coat. His voice was flat, like he'd already made up his mind. "Folks say you found a body. Care to tell me what's going on?" Caleb's throat tightened, but he forced his words steady. "Found a woman, dead, hung up in there. Ain't got no idea who she is or how she got there. I just bought the place Tate scribbled, his pencil scratching loud in the quiet. Just found her, huh? And you didn't think to come tell me right away?" Caleb's hands clenched, nails biting into his palms. "I was gonna, Sheriff, but I figured it'd look bad, me being new and all. Didn't want folks jumping to conclusions." Tate's eyes narrowed, pinning him like a bug on a board. "Folks are already concluding. They say you're a loner, Warwick. Man like that, moving into a place with a past, makes people wonder." Caleb felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept his tone even. "I ain't hiding nothing. You want to see the barn? Go look. I got no answers for you." The sheriff didn't move, just kept writing, each scratch of his pencil tightening the knot in Caleb's gut. Every word Caleb said felt like it was twisting against him, sounding flimsy, like a guilty man's excuses. He'd faced down wolves in the mountains, but this, standing in his own yard trying to prove he wasn't a killer, was a different kind of fight. Tate snapped his notebook shut. "I'll be back, Warwick. Don't go far." He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Caleb staring at the dust settling in his wake. Caleb turned back to the fence, hammering a nail with more force than needed. The valley was still, but he felt eyes everywhere. Neighbors, townsfolk, maybe even the mountains themselves. The sheriff's questions had woven a net, and Caleb could feel it tightening, pulling him toward a truth he didn't know and a blame he couldn't shake. He drove another nail, the thud echoing his racing pulse, and wondered how a man could fight a shadow. Caleb Warwick jolted awake, his cot creaking as the sound of snapping twigs cut through the night. The air in his small bedroom was thick, the kind of still that made every noise feel like a gunshot. He lay frozen, ears straining, as another faint crunch came from the yard. His heart kicked hard, and he swung his legs to the floor, grabbing the rifle propped by the door. The sheriff's visit had left him raw, and now this, someone or something, prowling outside his house in the dead of night. He eased the door open, the cool air sharp against his skin, and stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. The moon hung low, casting pale light over the valley, but the shadows around the barn and corral were thick, swallowing details. Another snap, closer now, near the fence line. Caleb moved forward, his boots soft on the dirt, eyes scanning the dark. A branch lay broken by the gate, its fresh split glinting in the moonlight. He crouched, fingers brushing the ground, and found tracks, boot prints, too deliberate to be an animal's. Someone had been here, watching, maybe waiting. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle, his breath shallow, as he followed the tracks toward the barn. The silence between sounds was worse than the noises themselves, heavy like a weight on his chest. He called out, voice low but firm, "Show yourself, or I start shooting." Nothing answered but the wind, rustling the dry grass. He circled the house, checking the corral, the shed, even the woodpile, but found no one. Just more broken twigs, more tracks leading nowhere. His pulse pounded, each step fueling a mix of fear and anger. He'd come here to be left alone, not hunted like some damn outlaw. Back on the porch, he sat, rifle across his knees, staring into the dark. The silence returned, thicker now, pressing against him like the mountains themselves. Every creak of the house, every gust across the valley felt like a threat. He'd faced danger in the wild, bears, storms, men with knives, but this was different. This was someone toying with him, leaving traces to rattle his nerves. The quiet wasn't peace anymore. It was a cage, trapping him with his own thoughts. Caleb rubbed his eyes, the image of the body in the barn flashing behind them. Whoever was out there knew something, and they were making sure he felt it. He stayed there till dawn, rifle in hand, the silence louder than any scream. Caleb Warwick couldn't sit still anymore, not with the tracks in his yard and the sheriff's questions hanging over him like a storm cloud. He'd had enough of waiting for trouble to find him. That morning, he saddled his horse, the leather creaking under his weight, and rode out to find answers about the woman in the barn. The valley air was crisp, the mountains looming sharp against a gray sky, but all he could think about was that body, her brittle form swaying in the dark. He needed to know who she was and why she was there before the whispers in town buried him. He tracked down Old Man Granger, a farmer who'd lived in these parts for decades, on a small spread 10 miles out. Granger was hunched over a plow, his hands gnarled like tree roots, when Caleb rode up. The old man squinted, wiping dirt from his brow, and listened as Caleb explained the barn's grim secret. "A woman hung up in there," Caleb said, voice low. "You know anything about that ranch before I got it?" Granger spat into the dirt, his eyes flickering with something uneasy. "That place belonged to the Hardings years back. Bad blood, that family. Folks said their daughter went missing. Some thought she ran off. Others, well, they didn't talk much. Strange things happened on that land." Caleb's gut twisted, the farmer's words sinking like stones. "What kind of strange things?" he pressed, leaning forward. Granger shrugged, but his voice dropped. "Fights, disappearances, debts that didn't get paid. The Hardings weren't right, Caleb. That ranch has ghosts and not the kind you see." He turned back to his plow like he'd said too much. Caleb stood there, the wind biting his face, piecing it together. A missing daughter, a cursed ranch. His find wasn't just bad luck. It was a secret someone wanted forgotten. Riding back, the trail felt narrower, the mountains closer, like they were boxing him in. He'd come to this valley for a clean start, but now he was digging into a past that wasn't his, one that could burn him. The Hardings' name meant something here, and not something good. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, his jaw set. He wasn't a man to run from trouble, but this felt bigger than him, bigger than a body in a barn. He was stirring up old wounds, and in a place like this that was a dangerous game. The ranch came into view, its sagging roof a dark mark against the hills, and Caleb knew he was in deeper than he'd ever planned. Caleb Warwick rode into town with a purpose, the dust from the trail clinging to his boots as he hitched his horse outside the saloon. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to know how deep the talk about him had spread. The sun beat down on the wooden storefronts, and the street was alive with the clatter of wagons and the low murmur of voices that hushed when he passed. He felt the stairs again, sharp as knives, cutting through the haze of his thoughts about the Hardings and that body in his barn. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with tobacco and the tang of spilled beer. Caleb ordered a whiskey, keeping his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room. The crowd was thin, but tense, like they were waiting for something to break. 2 men from the other night, the tall one with the scarred knuckles and his patchy bearded friend, stood at the bar, their heads turning as Caleb settled at a table. Scar Knuckles strode over, his boots heavy on the floorboards, and slammed his hand on the table. "You got some nerve showing your face, Warwick," he growled. "Folks say you're living on a killer's land. You won too." Caleb's fist clenched under the table, but he kept his voice low, steady. "I ain't killed nobody. You don't know me, so quit acting like you do." The shorter man stepped up, his smirk ugly. "We know enough. That ranch ain't right, and neither are you. What'd you do with that woman, huh?" The room went quiet, glasses clinking as heads turned. Caleb stood, his chair scraping, and faced them, his pulse pounding. "Keep talking, and we'll settle this outside. But I'm betting you're all mouth." The tall one shoved him, hard, and Caleb stumbled, catching himself on the table's edge. He could have swung, wanted to, bad, but he saw the crowd waiting, itching for blood. Instead, he straightened, brushing off his coat, and walked out, their laughter biting at his back. The street air hit him like a slap, cooling the heat in his face. He dodged a fight, but the accusation stung worse than any punch. Those men didn't just suspect him, they wanted him guilty. Caleb mounted his horse, the reins rough in his hands, and felt something harden inside him. He wasn't running, not from them, not from the truth. He'd find out what happened in that barn, or the valley would break him. The ride home was long, the mountains watching, and Caleb knew he was done hiding. Caleb Warwick was splitting wood in the yard when the sheriff's horse clopped up again, the sound sharp against the afternoon's quiet. Amos Tate dismounted, his face harder than last time, holding a folded cloth in one hand. Caleb set his axe down, the handle slick with sweat, and braced himself. The sheriff's boots stirred dust as he approached, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Found something that don't look good for you, Warwick," Tate said, unfolding the cloth to reveal a silver locket, its chain tarnished but intact. "This was in your barn, near where that body's hanging." "Care to explain?" Caleb's stomach dropped, but he kept his face steady. "Ain't mine, Sheriff. I told you I don't know nothing about that woman." Tate's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer, voice low. "Folks are saying it's tied to the Hardings, and you're living on their land. Looks like you're caught in something ugly." Caleb's mind raced. The locket wasn't there when he found the body. Someone had planted it. Someone who wanted him to take the fall. His hands balled into fists, the realization hitting like a punch. He was being set up, and the net was closing fast. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep, the sheriff's words gnawing at him. He sat by the window, rifle across his lap, the valley dark except for a flicker of light near the barn. It wasn't moonlight, too sharp, too fleeting, like a lantern moving in the shadows. He grabbed his coat, heart pounding, and stepped into the cold, the air biting his lungs. The light vanished as he approached, but the barn door was ajar, swaying slightly. He checked inside, finding nothing but the same stale smell and that body still hanging, a silent accusation. Someone was out there, toying with him, leaving clues to tighten the noose. Caleb stood in the yard, the mountains looming like walls, and felt something shift inside him. Fear had kept him quiet, cautious, but now anger burned hotter. Whoever was doing this, planting evidence, creeping around his land, thought they could break him. They were wrong. He wasn't some drifter to be run off or framed. His jaw clenched and he gripped the rifle tighter, the wood solid in his hands. For the first time, he wasn't just scared of what might happen. He was ready to fight for the truth, no matter what it cost. The valley was silent, but Caleb's rage was louder, pushing him toward a reckoning he couldn't avoid. Caleb Warwick couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was closing in, so he took to patrolling his ranch at night, rifle in hand. The valley was pitch black, the moon hidden behind clouds, but his eyes had learned to pick out shapes in the dark from years in the mountains. Around midnight, he caught it, a faint glow near the barn, the sharp smell of kerosene cutting through the crisp air. His pulse surged, and he moved fast, boots silent on the dirt, until he saw a figure crouched by the barn wall pouring liquid from a can. The man struck a match, the flame flaring bright, and Caleb charged, shouting, "Drop it or you're done." The man spun, startled, and Caleb recognized him. Eli Boone, a neighbor, with a sprawling ranch nearby, the same guy with scarred knuckles from the saloon. Boone dropped the match, but not the fight. He lunged, tackling Caleb into the dirt, the kerosene can clattering away. Fists flew in the dark, each punch landing with a dull thud, like thunder rolling low. Caleb's knuckles grazed Boone's jaw, pain shooting through his hand, but he pushed through, pinning Boone against the barn. "Why are you doing this?" Caleb growled, his voice raw. Boone spat blood, sneering. "That land's worth more than you know, Warwick. You're sitting on what's mine." Caleb's grip tightened, his mind racing. Boone wasn't just after trouble. He wanted the ranch, and that body, the locket, the tracks, all pointed to a plan to drive Caleb out or worse. The fight drained from Boone as Caleb pressed harder, his knee on the man's chest. "You set me up, didn't you? Planted that locket." Boone didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Caleb shoved him away, standing, breath heaving. The barn loomed behind them, the woman's body still inside, a secret tied to Boone's greed. The truth hit Caleb like a kick. This wasn't just about suspicion anymore. It was a calculated move, and he'd almost lost everything. He dragged Boone to his feet, the man's face bruised, eyes burning with hate. Caleb didn't shoot him, though the urge was strong. Instead, he pushed him toward the road, rifle raised. "Get off my land. Next time, you won't walk away." Boone stumbled off, and Caleb stood alone, the kerosene stink clinging to the air. The fight had cleared his head, but the truth felt heavier than ever. Someone like Boone, with money and pull, could twist the valley against him. Caleb looked at the barn, its shadow dark against the mountains, and knew the real danger wasn't the accusations. It was what men would do to keep their secrets buried. Caleb Warwick sat in the sheriff's office, the chair hard under him, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and dust. The room was small, its walls lined with wanted posters, and Sheriff Amos Tate leaned across the desk, his gray mustache twitching as he listened. Caleb's hands rested on his knees, still bruised from the fight with Eli Boone, as he laid it all out. The body in the barn, the locket, the kerosene, and Boone's attempt to burn his place down. His voice stayed steady, but inside his chest felt hollow, like he was shouting into a canyon with no echo. "Boone's after my land, Sheriff," Caleb said. "He planted that locket to make me look guilty." Tate leaned back, his chair creaking, and rubbed his jaw. "That's a big claim, Warwick. Boone's got weight in this valley, owns half the grazing land east of here." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he pushed on. "I ain't lying. He was at my barn with a match and a can of kerosene. Check the tracks. The can's still there." Tate's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, scribbling in his notebook. After a long pause, he admitted, "Found some things that don't add up. That locket's got no clear tie to you, and Boone's been pushing to buy that ranch for years. Looks like you might be right about a setup." The words were grudging, like pulling teeth, but they were something. Caleb left the office, stepping into the town's main street, where the sun glared off the dirt and shop windows. People lingered outside the general store, their eyes following him, sharp and cold, like they hadn't heard the sheriff's half-hearted clearance. A woman pulled her kid closer as he passed, and a man spit into the dust, muttering something Caleb didn't catch. He kept walking, his boots heavy, feeling the weight of their distrust settle deeper than Boone's fists ever could. He'd told the truth, fought for it, but the valley didn't care. To them, he was still the outsider, the man living on cursed land with a body in his barn. He climbed onto his horse, the saddle creaking under him, and rode out of town, the mountains rising sharp against the sky. The sheriff's words hadn't freed him. They'd just left him empty, like a fire that burned out and left cold ash. Caleb had come here for a home, but all he'd found was suspicion, a truth that didn't matter to folks who'd already judged him. The road stretched ahead, and as the town faded behind him, he felt the hollow ache of a man who'd won a fight but lost something bigger. Caleb Warwick rode back to his ranch, the reins loose in his hands, the valley stretching wide and quiet under a sky bruised with dusk. The mountains stood tall, their peaks cutting sharp against the fading light, watching him like they'd seen every step of his fight, every accusation, every fist thrown, every truth that didn't matter. He dismounted by the house, the familiar creak of the porch under his boots, feeling more like a warning than a welcome. The ranch was supposed to be his fresh start, a place to plant roots, but now it was just a patch of dirt stained with secrets and suspicion. He walked to the edge of the yard, staring at the barn where it all began. Its sagging roof loomed dark, the memory of that woman's body still hanging in his mind, as real as the dust on his hands. The sheriff had cleared him, sort of, but the townsfolk's eyes told a different story. They'd always see him as the stranger who stirred up trouble, the man tied to a cursed ranch. Caleb kicked a rock into the dirt, its dull thud swallowed by the evening stillness. He'd come here to escape the loneliness of the mountains, but what he found was worse. People's distrust, sharp and heavy, cutting deeper than any cold night alone. The mountains didn't judge, though. They just stood there, silent, taking in his every move. Caleb looked up at them, their shadows stretching long across the valley, and felt a strange pull. This land wasn't home, not like he'd hoped, but it was his. The cruelty of folks like Boone, the whispers in town, the weight of being an outsider. They'd tried to break him, and maybe they had, a little, but not enough to make him run. He'd faced worse in the wild, and he wasn't about to let a valley full of hard stares chase him off. Caleb sat on the porch, the wood rough under him, and lit a fire in the pit nearby. The flames crackled, pushing back the dark, but they couldn't touch the emptiness inside. He'd stay, not because the ranch was salvation, but because the mountains were the only place that didn't care about his past. They'd take him as he was, scarred, stubborn, and alone. The fire's glow lit his face, and he realized it wasn't solitude that had worn him down. It was the suspicion, the way it twisted truth and turned neighbors into enemies. Caleb leaned back, the stars cold above, and decided to keep going, because sometimes staying was the only way to fight.